Coordinators. Can they start a sentence? One of the most common issues I see when helping students with their writing is the use of coordinating conjunctions at the beginning of a sentence, which begs our central question today. Can you start a sentence with a coordinating conjunction, also known as a coordinator? And the answer is not very clear, to be perfectly honest, but let's break down what we do know. Coordinators in practice are used for three separate instances when introducing a clause: when they're linking two clauses together in a compound sentence, when they begin an introductory element, and when they're introducing a clause. But let's take a look at examples of each of these so we can see how they function and whether or not these are actually appropriate uses. Now, the most common use of a coordinator to introduce a clause is when it's linking a clause, and this is the widely accepted use. No problems with this at all. Here, we have a sentence: you must go to jail. But we want to add a second sentence that is equally important and related to it. So we add a comma, but. And then we introduce our second sentence: you will not pass go. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with this use. Obviously, this is the most common and most accepted use of a conjunction to introduce a clause because we have two complete sentences here. We have a subject, you, in the first sentence, and you again in the second clause. And then we have our predicate, which is the verb, must go, in the first clause and will not pass in the second clause. So we've got two complete sentences, a comma, and a but. And this creates the compound sentence. So, using coordinators to link two independent clauses is perfectly acceptable. However, when you're using a coordinator to link two independent clauses, you must introduce the coordinator with the comma. If you want to learn more about that rule, check out our video on run-on sentences, because if you don't follow it properly, you could be creating a run-on sentence either in the form of a comma splice or in the form of a fused sentence. Next, we have the coordinators in an introductory element. Here we have an introductory element: and while in jail, comma, you won't collect $200. Now, obviously, we would have had another sentence before this, and you're adding the idea here. But the question is this acceptable? It is common to introduce sentences with introductory elements. However, this is usually not done with a coordinator, but rather it is done with one of three elements: adverbs, prepositions, or rather prepositional phrases, or subordinating conjunctions. Let's take a look at examples, beginning with the adverbs we have here. However, you will not collect $200. And you see we begin with the word however, which is an adverb. And for that introductory element, we close it out. So whenever you begin with an adverb, you close that out with a comma. We also have our prepositions, or rather prepositional phrases. Example: in prison, comma, you will not collect $200. And we begin with that preposition in, like prepositions might include in, on, of, out, and we introduce that element with the preposition, and we close it with a comma. Anytime you start a sentence with a preposition, in, on, of, out, you're going to close that element out with a comma and then begin your independent clause. Here, you will not collect $200. And finally, we have these subordinated conjunctions. Because you are going to jail, comma, you will not collect $200. So here, rather than a coordinator, we have a subordinated conjunction, because, and again, it introduces a subordinate clause that serves as an introductory element, and it is likewise closed out with a comma. These three approaches are all acceptable. However, not everybody agrees that coordinators can be used in this manner. Therefore, I typically advise people to err on the side of caution and not use this approach. You may find some websites and some grammatical instructional books that will advocate for this use of a coordinator at the beginning of the sentence. However, because a lot of people aren't familiar with the rule and a lot of people don't accept the rule, I typically steer away from this approach. But the question becomes, what can we do instead? Well, the answer is quite simple. Let's say we begin with the introductory element that has a coordinator. And while in jail, comma, you won't collect $200. Now, in this context, to avoid the coordinator, all we need to do is remove it. And we can simply start with while in jail. This transition still shows the reader that you're adding an idea onto the previous sentence and that you're linking the two together. The final use that I see with the coordinator at the beginning of the sentence, and the most problematic, is introducing clauses. You must go to jail, period, full stop, end of sentence. But you will not pass go. And in this context, the word but is simply introducing an independent clause. There's no introductory element, and it's not being linked to the previous sentence in a compound sentence. This approach is widely regarded as incorrect. Therefore, I strongly advise people not to use this approach. I have read a couple of articles that said it was perfectly fine, but those articles seem to have a very misguided understanding of the grammatical rules at play here. So again, avoid this approach. Even if you do use the coordinator at the beginning of an introductory element, it's almost universally regarded as incorrect to simply introduce an independent clause with a coordinating conjunction and nothing else. That said, if you do it, you need to make a change if you catch your error. So how do you correct this? Well, here, instead of writing, but you will not pass go, you simply replace that with an adverb. However, comma, you will not pass go. And there's lots of options for each of the major coordinating conjunctions. If you use and at the beginning of a sentence, you can typically replace that with additionally or parallel words. Moreover, furthermore, likewise, and also. If you're using but or yet at the beginning of a sentence, you can typically just replace that with however, comma, in contrast, comma. And if you're using or nor, both of those can actually be replaced with alternately, comma. And finally, we have so, which is a little tricky because the word so is both a coordinator and an adverb. So you could technically use it as an adverb at the beginning of a sentence, but it usually sounds informal in those contexts. So I usually use therefore, comma, thus, comma, hence, comma. A quick summary here. The coordinators are often used to link clauses in the context of a compound sentence as part of an introductory element that leads off the element, and to simply introduce a clause. However, for the introductory elements, this practice is not universally regarded as correct, so I typically encourage students to avoid that. And likewise, introducing clauses with a coordinating conjunction and nothing else is also seen as generally inadvisable and almost universally regarded as incorrect. So I likewise discourage students and writers in general from using that approach, but you're perfectly fine linking two independent clauses together in a compound sentence as long as you use that comma before the coordinated conjunction. Now, I hope that was clear and helpful. If you have any questions about this whatsoever, drop them in the comments section below. We'll be happy to get to them as soon as possible. And until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.